Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Today, I'm excited to welcome Jenny Castillo, a bright and passionate voice in global health policy. Jenny recently earned her Master of Global Affairs from the University of Notre Dame, and she brings a unique blend of scientific expertise and policy insight. Originally from Belize, she began her career as a biochemistry researcher before shifting into the world of international health. We'll be talking about her journey, her perspective on global health challenges, and what she thinks young professionals can do to make a difference in this ever-changing field. Would you like to say hello?
Hi everyone, super happy to be here.
Okay, I'll be starting off with my questions so you can answer truthfully. Question number one says, you started in biochemistry and shifted into global health policy. If your career were a storybook, what would the title of the chapter you're in right now be and why?
That's a great question. I don't think I've ever thought about that before. Um, I think it would be a biochemist's guide to policymaking. And I say this, and I was inspired by another book title, but I think it's seeing as someone who spoke the language of the scientists and research, and now speaking the language of policymakers and policymaking in general. And from the perspective of a biochemist who is pretty much used to working in the lab, doing a lot of behind the scenes work, doing a lot of what we call objective work, clean work. It's seeing everything unfolding from the policy side, the people, the institutions, the decision making, the power dynamics. And so thinking about how we think about that, not as something that does not belong to the science space, not as something that is not relevant to the science space, but as something that complements research. So policymaking and research, how do they complement each other? But how do I see it and what I think and how is it different, but also how very similar it is in general.
Okay, sounds pretty good. All right, the second question, if you could design a global health policy using three words as your guiding principle, what would they be?
Okay, this is a tough one. I think at the core of policymaking, what I believe should be the most important thing is to ask who is it serving, and who is it going to be benefiting. And sometimes the people who are making these decisions are need to be conscious or need to be aware of who are they representing or who are they speaking of on whose behalf. Someone that is a beneficiary potentially is not involved, how good of a job am I of reflecting their voices or of representing them in that space? So I think when it comes to the three ways or three words that I would use, I think it would be patient-centered or human-centered, sustainable, and I want to say founded on the values of integral human development. And I know that goes beyond one word, but I think with the idea that no one gets left behind, that the policy is serving not only in quantity, but in quality. It's not only how many people am I going to serve or how cheap I can make that policy to be, but with the service that I'm offering or with the policy that I'm making, will the impact be sustainable? Will the impact go beyond just the 2 or 3 months that I'm implementing it or the 8 months that it's there for? And I don't think that at this point we've done a great job of doing policies that are for the long term. I think a lot of times we think about, okay, when there's a disease out, there's contagious diseases, infectious diseases, what it not be. We think about what can we do immediately to stop the damage from spreading and from becoming more. But then after that, there's really no follow up to that policy. There's really no evaluation. And certainly in the prevention side, I think we need to be more proactive than reactive. And I don't think that we've done a good job of that yet.
That's a very interesting perspective to take. Okay, for this really quick segment, we're going to do something called a quick take, which is policy or practice. I'll name a topic and you tell me if you think real change is more likely to come from good policy or hands-on practice. Just a sentence or two per answer. Are you ready?
Not really, but let's go.
Okay, the first topic is vaccine uptake in rural communities.
I think it's hands-on practice. I think human behavior, it's very hard to bring in policy to change human behavior because often that policy is really meant to change norms and it's really meant to go against culture, tradition, and belief. And when that happens, it can become problematic. And so I think it has to be something that they decide on their own. I mean, at the end of the day, taking a vaccine, I do believe it's a personal decision. But I do think that beyond a policy, it has to be something that is changing human behavior, and that can only happen when it's hands-on practice.
Next one is plastic waste reduction.
Plastic waste reduction, I think I would lean more on hands-on practice because I think with policy, sometimes it would tell you that you have a recycling bin next to you, and why would you want to walk the extra 2 steps to go and deposit your plastic waste into the recycling bin when you can just throw it in the trash can, right? I think with climate change in general, it's difficult to understand or to see the effects or damaging effects because it's not instantaneous, it's not close to home, it's not something that is so visceral that you can experience it. So for plastic waste, I think it has to become a habit of, okay, I understand that this goes into a separate bin, or this is the way that I should dispose of that, or this is how much I should waste on a given day or a given month. So it's something that you have to be super aware and super cautious about. And I think hands-on practice would help with that more than a policy.
Okay. Thank you so much for your answers. We'll be continuing on with the regular questions. So number 3, we're going to take a look at your home country, Belize. What's one lesson the global community could learn from how small nations handle health challenges?
I think with smaller nations, there's a lot less bureaucracy, or there's a lot less options to pick from, or a lot less people involved. And I say this not to be against small nations, discriminating small nations, or being offensive towards any nation, but at least from Belize's perspective, you have these group of experts involved, and there are not as many as probably in the US or in Europe or in Asia. And having less people involved in the policy making space or at the round table making the decision, I think it makes it easier to maybe pass a policy, to have the access to the actual policymaker, the representative, or the person who's involved in making these decisions. And that, I think, is something that the global community could take lessons from, and understanding that to make a good policy, to make a robust policy, to make a policy that works for the people, you don't need 10,000 people involved. You don't need all these people to be in agreement. You don't need all these people to be signing off on it. You just need the most important, the most knowledgeable, the top expert in your field, or the most sensitive person to the community that is also involved in it, to understand it and to understand what it means. So you don't need a large group. You do not need the bureaucracy there. Policies can work well on its own.
I feel like a lot more people need to hear that. Okay. Question 4, imagine you're building a global health dream team. What types of experts or voices, you don't have to mention any specific names, would you include and why?
Okay, this is a tough one. I don't think I thought about this before, but when I think about policy, I think about at least 2 immediate groups that I know I want to involve. Is one, the beneficiaries, the people that are going to benefit from the policies, because I need to know what do they think about what we're envisioning for problem solving, because I think at times there is a disconnect between what the policymakers are doing and what the people need. And that is already predisposing that policy to failure. So asking the people, you having the beneficiary on the dream team would help me to understand how do they see the problem that we're trying to solve, but how from their end they would solve it. And they don't need to have the answers. We're there to support, but I think just getting that perspective from them would be incredibly helpful. 2, excuse me, I think policy in general is meant to change to some extent human behavior, or how I think the behavioral psychology is playing into policymaking. I think it's an important component that policymakers is not really explored much, or at least given it as much importance as they should. But I would love to have behavioral psychologists in place to tell us how people are perceiving these policies, because people, when we're rolling out a policy, when we're implementing a policy, we need people to uptake it, we need people to use it, we need people to adhere to it. And if that doesn't happen, then it all goes downhill. If I say there's an infectious disease, I was talking about COVID, use masks, 6 feet apart, whatever the evidence was saying, we were rolling out policies in that direction. But were people really adhering to that? No. Why? I think the behavioral psychology would say a lot to that. And then, again, in general, I think just really depending on the issue that we're trying to solve, for the experts who know more than I do, they can inform me to the best of their abilities, to the best of my ability, in what to make and how to make the best decision that I can with the information that I have and for the people that I'm working with.
Do you have any people that you would like to work with in the future? Any specific
Um,
names?
any specific names? I mean, I think, I think of my friends, people who are studied with me in college, people who spoke with me, studied with me recently as I finished my master's program. I think of how brilliant they are. I think about how differently we see things, how we come from different backgrounds, different countries altogether. And I know Dr. Fauci from the US is no longer, in power, or at least in control of the National Institutes of Health and the allergy institutes. But I think Dr. Fauci, I really admire him as a scientist, as a person, as a human. I think he did envision what it means to be a researcher, but also what it means to be compassionate with the policy making field. So working with any of them would be a great privilege in the future.
Okay. All right. Next question. Global health often focuses on crisis response. If you had the power to shift the world's focus to prevention, what's the first change you'd make?
Yeah, I think that's a really challenging task to do. Because we have different foundations that are working, that do a lot of philanthropic work with prevention at the core of the mission of whatever project they're doing. But because prevention does not have any, I would say, immediate gratifying results. So if I am eating healthy, for example, to prevent diabetes or prevent heart disease, well, I may not feel super energetic today, or I may not feel like, oh my gosh, I saved so many years of my life because I'm doing this. I'm sorry. But I think really understanding how people think about the decisions they make. There is a podcast that I follow, Traceology. It really walks you through how people make decisions. And it shows you how sometimes, even if it's in our best interest, we go against it. We make a decision that's really not in our best interest at all. And so with prevention, I think really showing people that, okay, you are losing more than you're gaining. So we know for a fact from behavioral psychology that we as humans are more prone to do something when there is a loss than a gain. So if I say you're going to lose X number of lives, if you don't eat healthy compared to you're going to gain X number of lives, then people are more likely to follow a policy when there is a loss, or when you're seeing an impact that could potentially happen to you. And so I think when it comes to shifting things to prevention, I think really highlighting that prevention is really not just us as policymaker making a policy that is going to add something to your life, but we're doing this so that you don't lose things in the future, right? So that you don't regret the decision that you made, so that you can spend so many more times, and memories, and make all of these great experiences with your family, your friends, or your colleagues, or your loved ones. So I think that's one of the things that I would bring across.
Okay, that's a really, really good answer that I wholeheartedly agree on. Okay, next question. Was there a moment, maybe a conversation, a project, or something you saw that made you say, yes, this is why I want to be in global health?
I think when COVID happened, that's when I realized I just couldn't be a biochemist, or at least not just do the lab work. And I don't think it happened like from one night to the other, but I think seeing how it unfolded and seeing how scientists were really debating amongst themselves about what is COVID and what are the benefits or the cons of the vaccinations or the treatments that were being developed, the pros and cons of research. To me, it seemed like if we were all scientists, if we're all biochemists, we should all agree on the same knowledge because science does not change. Yeah, it's as factual as it can be. So if I say this is the way that the virus works, this is the mechanism of action of the medicine, we all need to agree on that because there's only one thing that can be true. Um, but we saw it with COVID that scientists were even disagreeing among themselves about what it means to have COVID, how is it manifesting, how are we treating it, how are we preventing it, how are we controlling it. And so I felt like the research of science could just not speak on its own. And I still wholeheartedly believe that it cannot speak on its own. I think there is always subjectivity around it that shifts how standalone it can be. And so I think 2020 was really a pivotal moment for me to see, okay, where do I stand in terms of science, but also can I become more involved in global health diplomacy? And I continue to think that that's the way that I want to go.
I feel like COVID was a really big turning point in a lot of people's lives. Okay, for our next segment, it says on the ground or at the table. If you had to choose just one for the next 5 years, would you rather work on the ground in communities or be at the table where global health policy is written and why?
Can I pick both? I've been
Sure.
I think it's I think it's one thing for me to be sitting down on paper, and it's super important because at the end of the day you're drafting something that is going to go out in the community. But if I am not in the community to see how it's implemented, how it's uptaken, how people are reacting to it, then I miss a whole entire picture of what that policy means. And so it could be that's failure, that it's prone to failure from the writing aspect that we as policymakers just didn't know what the hell we're doing, or it could be that it's a policy failure because the people on the ground were not as receptive to it as we initially thought. And
Right.
so I think maybe first being on the ground and understanding the problem, understanding the people, understanding who we're making it for, what are the questions that they're asking, and what are the questions that we're failing to ask. And then going back with all of that insight and say, okay, based on the information that I have, based on the people that I've spoken with, based on what I know, I think this is what we need to be writing. So I think they're super complementary, and I would hope to be in a space where I'm privileged enough to at least be participating in both on both ends.
Okay, and then for your final question, if you could send a 1 minute voice message to the next generation of global health leaders, what would you say?
I would say know who you are making the policy for. Know the people, ask them questions, involve them, engage with them, love them. Because the same way that you take care of a family, the same way you take care of your friends, that with as much passion is how you maybe seek a cure to a disease, or you do as much effort to keep looking after their well-being. And if you are not knowing who you're making the policy for, these people that have so many different ideas, so many different talents, so many different gifts, then you cannot take care of them properly. And so unless you make that extra effort to say, whoa, what do you think about this? We're thinking to do this, but we want to know what you want. We want to know what you need. We want to know historically who has hurt you so that we don't hurt you in the same way. Because there are different people's groups that have been, manipulated, have been tortured, that have been harmed because of medicine, because of science. And we do not want to repeat that. And so I would say with the same passion that you take care of the people that you love, that is the same passion that you need to go and make a policy for the people that you're going to be working with.
Okay. If any global health leaders are watching this, I hope you take it into account. Okay, Jaylene, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight today. Your journey from science and beliefs to shaping global health ideas at Notre Dame is truly inspiring. We really appreciate your thoughtful answers, and I'm sure many listening will walk away with a better understanding of global health and maybe even the motivation to get involved themselves. Thanks again.
Thank you for having me.